My name is Blane Harding, and I recently retired from Virginia Tech. And as you can see on the screen, I'm in transition. So I'm not quite sure what the future holds, but I'm really happy to be here and really happy for you to join us.
And hello, my name is George Steele, and as you can see, I retired from Ohio State. I'm acting as a consultant right now. And like Blane, I am here and very happy to be working with Blane and with you.
We have learning activities outcomes for the session, and participants will be able to do the following. Number one is explore the concepts of undecided students as a population with specific needs and challenges. Also, we'll be able to review theories, principles, and resources about career awareness and student decision-making so that you can actually begin to put together both of those. The undecided students with their career decisions as well. We want to also be able to explore the opportunities to help students bridge academic interest with career aspirations. And sometimes students really don't understand that. They just kind of look at what they're good at and think that that's what they're actually going to be doing for their career. We want to have a more structured approach to them deciding where they want to go in terms of majors and in terms of career options. We also want to be aware of the benefits of technological advances in helping students in undecided and exploring students. From the cartoon, you can see that there's a little bit of confusion. Just because you see 4 and the other person sees 3, sometimes that's where students are. They really don't understand the nature of higher education. They don't understand the nature of majors. So we've got to make sure that, number one, we're in agreement on what we're looking for in terms of students and making sure that they understand what their options are. But this is just a cartoon to actually kind of explain that to you, that not everybody sees it the same way.
Thank you, Blane. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about an overview of what we're going to be then doing here in terms of the flow of this presentation. We're going to first address undecided students. Who are they and why are they undecided? We're going to look at different types of decided and undecided students and realize that this is not a binary issue. They're not just decided and undecided. There's a whole continuum we're going to be trying to present to you. We're going to go into a little bit of 2 ways of looking at this. One is what in the individual advising session and working with them. And Blaine's going to talk about the 3I process, and I'm going to look at it more in a programmatic way and talk about Virginia Gordon's curriculum for exploration. And then we're both going to get into the idea of considering methods of delivery of advising to students who are undecided about their educational career direction. And what we're going to be doing is trying to then have you look at some case studies and interpret some ways in which these ideas that we are talking about in this session could be applied to a real type of student situation. So what we'll do is we'll get started with this. Undecided students, who are they? Well, as Virginia wrote in her first edition of the book that she did back in early on about undecided students, students who are unwilling, unable, and unready to make educational and or vocational choices. So that's interesting here. Unwilling, why? Unable, do they have the skill sets? Do they know how? Do they have the information? Or unready? Are they just at a developmental stage that they're not at that point wanting to address this type of issue? So these are students who enter college with a tentative decision that can change. Again, what we're looking at here is that this is not a binary issue. Some students enter in, just wanted to test the water a little bit, and then they decide to get out of the pool and go into another area of the pool. That is fine. These are sometimes students who are rejected from a selective or an oversubscribed program. I know that many of you have programs like this, particularly in the healthcare area. Some of your business programs and engineering all have programs that only so many students can get in. You have students who want to get in, but when they end up by not being able to gain access to it, maybe in their sophomore year, they become undecided. And then again, there's major changers in transition. As we mentioned, this is not binary. Some students start out as decided and then become undecided and then have to become redecided again. Undecided students may be those students who have high ability. These may be like honor students who have too many options because they have too many possibilities they're embracing. Student athletes, these may be students who are on scholarship, and by their nature of their scholarship have to have chosen a major upon entry, but really are not satisfied with that. Adult learners could be people who are going through this process and are going through a career change in midlife. Underprepared students could be across the board a number of type of students who may be trying to access majors in which they don't have the academic preparation. Community college students, transfer students, upper division students. The nature of undecidedness and one change direction can occur anywhere along that student's lifespan continuum. So that is one of the points we hope you really take into consideration here. Now, one of the nice things that Virginia did, and again, I'm just going to state this, and emphatically, Virginia Gordon did more about working with undecided students than anybody else anywhere. All right. And I was fortunate to be able to work with her for 25 years, and maybe some of that rubbed off. I'm not sure how much, but I do think that when she did her subtypes, she really helped advance the field, because what she took a look at is not looking at it in a binary way, but on a continuum. So she identified 3 types of decided students, 3 types of undecided types, and 1 indecisive. And the key point here is that the indecisive student are the ones that have most great difficulty in making decisions. And we probably can't really work with them, and they require some type of counseling. But on the other types, the decided and the undecided types, we can. And so as we approach this, what we want to do is take a look at this on a continuum. Very decided, somewhat decided, unstable decided, tentatively decided. And there's a lot of reasons and explanations for this, which we can go into a little bit later. But you'll notice that in the middle there, the tentatively undecided, these are people who might have it narrowed down to 1 or 2 choices. Developmentally is that they're not prepared to make the decision. Seriously undecided is that they really have difficulty making decisions. They don't know the information. And those are the undecided types. Now, the very decided, again, these people may change later on, as we talked about. Somewhat decided is that they're going down that path, but they're not totally convinced. They may need some help in order to move them along. The unstable decided, these are sometimes students who are underprepared or not academically prepared for what they want to pursue. They may have foreclosed on looking at the entire notion of what they want to do. But it's the chronically indecisive that we should be referring to counseling. And these are people who are under a great deal of stress. They may end up by exhibiting a number of other characteristics about an inability to make decisions, not only about this, but other areas of their lives. So a lot of things can contribute to this. There's some of it's informational, and as Blane talked earlier on, some of it's just information, not knowing what's out there, not being aware of what the majors are, what type of careers are out there. One of the activities I remember we always used to do with our undecided students is have them write down every career they could possibly think of, and no one could come over 20. And we all know that when you look into the Occupational Outlook Handbook and other type of sources that are out there, there are over 10,000, sometimes 15,000 types of careers listed. So they need to know what more is available. Developmentally is lack of knowledge regarding decision-making processes, inability to make decisions, or lack of vocational maturity or identity. Sometimes people don't know about themselves. They don't know what their interests are. They don't know what their abilities are. They don't think about what they really value. And so we need to help them in that type of ability. The other one, in terms of decision making, we have so many different majors out there. How do you begin to compare and contrast this type of process so that it can help them make it easier, so that they can do some comparing and contrasting and figuring out what they really want to do? Under personal and social, again, personal values, they may want to be going in a particular direction in terms of helping people and having a helping type of profession, but they've maybe locked on to just nursing as the only way of being able to manifest that. Interest and ability conflict, of course, we're all familiar with that. I give you a very easy one. I have an interest in playing golf, but I have no ability. So we have these potential conflicts that occur all the time. And so that's the type of thing, and the influence of others. And as we all know, there are many opportunities where students are influenced by their family or their peers in terms of what to choose and select. So other areas too that we can take a look at, but what we do is just not only influence of others, but again, just a general way of lack of interest in even going to college would be one possibility. So working with these, one of the first things we want to do is have you engaged in an activity. And there's a worksheet we're going to be showing you that we want you to be able to use, and just answer these 3 questions. What are your most successful approaches when you work with your decided students? What about your developmentally undecided students? What about your seriously undecided students? So what we want you to do, and what we'll do, is that when we go into our engagement session, we're going to be pulling from you these type of responses from the worksheet, and we're going to have a conversation about them. But in the meantime, Blane is going to go ahead and start talking about career advising.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that. As everybody knows, when you're talking about undecided students, you also have to have a career choice, and you have to have a way of actually finding out what those career choices are. And very oftentimes those career choices aren't simply built on what their best characteristics are, what their best skills are. Sometimes they don't even understand the nature of the careers that they're actually going into, let alone understand the nature of the majors that are that are leading towards those careers. So it all works in advising sessions. There's 3 areas that you really need to concentrate on and 3 components that have been identified by Virginia Gordon. And one is the inquiry. And we'll talk about these individually in just a second. The other is to inform, and the third one is to integrate. So let's take a look at definitions of these 3 areas, what we call the 3I process. Inquire is asking probing questions so advisors and students as partners in the process can address certain situations correctly. And it's really interesting. There's probably 5 or 6 different ways you can actually ask probing questions. You can repeat the question to make sure that you understand. You can make sure that they have a very sound definition of what they're actually asking for. But you've got to be asking those probing questions, because without those questions, you're not going to reach the results that you want. The second area is inform. Advisors must connect advisees with reliable resources for career information, especially related to particular interests and goals. So for example, when I was advising at Colorado State University, I was advising criminal justice students, and they all wanted to be CSI agents. And we all know that if you're a CSI agent, you've got to be a chemistry or biology major, but they didn't know that because they didn't understand the career information that was necessary to make those type of decisions. So we want to make sure that we give them the information necessary so they can make rational, intelligent, educated decisions on their own behalf with our support as advisors and mentors. And the third area is to integrate, and is connect self-assessment with the major, and a major with occupational information so that they can begin to explore the career planning process so they can make effective decisions. My daughter is a perfect example. When she started college, she wanted to go to med school because she was a whiz in math and science, but she could not stand anything that had to do with medicine. She ended up being a sociology major with a minor in women's studies and ethnic studies because that's where her passion was. That's where she was really interested in. So we've got to make sure that we not only connect it with their occupational information, and not only connect it with the planning process, but also with their passion, because these are going to be careers that they may be into for a while. These are careers that are going to start out once they graduate from college, that they're going to be able to establish that foundation from which they can grow from. 7 steps of the career advising process listed within the umbrella of, once again, Virginia Gordon's 3I process. To inquire. 2 things that are really important under inquire is to establish a rapport and build working relationships with the students. It doesn't matter to me what your title is. It doesn't matter to me what your position is on the university campus. Without building strong relationships, we will not be successful in the work that we do. And these are working relationships. Personal relationships may come later once they've graduated, but we're talking about working with them so they can make those rational decisions. Second, you have to determine students' knowledge base and their assessing needs. And George talked about that a little bit as well, because sometimes students lack the knowledge that's really necessary to make those type of decisions. So we want to make sure that we're building on their knowledge base and how they actually ask those questions so that they can make those decisions. Under inform, there's 3 areas that we want to make sure you understand. Explain and help students to understand the valuable connections that exist between self-awareness, educational choices, occupational information, and academic and career planning. And I think for the most part, they understand a little bit about the education, the occupation, and the academic, but very oftentimes they lack self-awareness. These are sometimes 18, 19-year-old kids that are coming to our campus that really have never explored their self-awareness, never really realized where they're coming from. So I think that's a really important aspect of this whole process, is to make sure that they understand who they are, and what they want out of their educational choices. And we have to explain interventions to assist students in self-major and career explorations. It's kind of interesting that it says explain interventions, because sometimes we just intervene and they don't know why. They have no reason. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And how come you're not helping me? But the intervention is what we want to do. The intervention allows us to actually make referrals to the right sources, referrals to the right resources on campus to help those students out. As George said, some of them may need counseling. And they're not accustomed to that, because when you talk about a counselor in high school, that's not what a counselor in high school does. Some of them don't even realize that you've got professional counselors on your campus that can help them with stressful situations and help them to be able to see where they're at and how they actually view themselves. The last area under inform is set career advising goals. You've got to have goals, and you've got to have steps to reach those goals. And it's up to us to help students to set those goals, but it's also helping them understand that they have to set realistic goals, and they have to make sure they're realistic goals. George will never be a pro golfer. We understand that. So we make sure that he understands that might not be the best option for him. Lastly, we want to integrate. Review and integrate gathering information, including interpretation and exploratory results. And that's really important too, because if you take a look at NACADA over the past few years, they've talked about advising as teaching. And that's really what we're doing when we're reviewing and we're gathering information. We're also having them be part of that process because they've got to gather that information as well. You know, we're not going to become dictators. We are advisors. We're helping them to make those choices. We're not forcing them to make choices. And the last area is evaluate and plan any short-term and long-term follow-ups with the students. And we have to make sure we follow up with the students and not just that short-term follow-up, that semester by semester follow-up. It may become more integrated than that. It may be that we're following up with students on a regular basis because we set down a plan, and the plan has to have milestones. We want to make sure that the students are reaching all of those milestones. So form 2 groups to create lists. The first group is going to create a list according to competencies that are needed for academic advising. The second group will create a list for competencies for career advising. And we're going to see that there are some differences between academic advising and career advising, but we're also going to see that there are similarities between academic advising and career advising. Just as there's similarities between teaching and advising, there's similarities across over in terms of these two areas of our program. Similarities and differences between academic advising and career advising. Functional skills, counseling and listening. Building relationships, as I talked about earlier. Communication, and it's not just communicating, it's ongoing communicating. If you're the only person talking in the advising session, then you're really not communicating with that student. It's got to be something that both of you are actively involved with. Both of you are actually communicating with each other. We've got to be teaching them skills, teaching them how to make decisions, teaching them how to do research, teaching them how to find the realities of what higher education really can provide for them. We have to help them with decision making, and those are functional skills. You've got to be able to make decisions. We're going to help them with the decisions, but the ultimate choice here is the student's choice. Unless the student is doing something that's drastically wrong, that's going to interfere with their ability to graduate, we want to make sure that they understand that they're the people that are in control of their own decision making. We want to challenge them and support them, and I think that's extremely important. We don't just want to tell them what they're doing right, we also want to tell them what they're doing wrong, and then we want to make the proper referrals. And that's really what we do as advisors, because we're not the end all be all on college campuses. That's why we have a variety of different resources for students to actually utilize. On the knowledge base, you're getting student development. If a student graduates after 4 years and it's the same person that you were talking to when they entered as freshmen, then we did not do our job. Students have to develop, they have to grow. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes that once said, as long as you live, you try and change, because change is an indication of life. Let's make sure that those students are also changing and growing, and they're going to become the leaders in the new generation. Institutional, we've got to make sure that that's in place, policies and procedures, that we understand those, and we understand why they're in place. And sometimes when you talk about challenging on the functional side, you may have to challenge some policies and procedures, because there's certain policies and procedures on certain campuses that are kind of detrimental to student success. So we want to make sure that we're acting as advocates for our students in terms of that. We might not be successful in changing the policy, but we certainly can bring it to the folks' attention that that might be an interference in students progressing. We've got to make sure we understand programs and degrees, and we also have to understand support services. Encourage student responsibilities. Informational interviewing, job shadowing, volunteering, finding related work experiences, matching their abilities and interest with courses, encouraging co-curricular activities, career services, utilizing the internet, which I need help in, complete interest inventories, talk with faculty members, and self-reflection. This is encouraging students so that we're empowering students, so that we're having students have agency in this process, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to have to live with the careers that they choose. So we want to make sure that we're doing all of these. And when you take a look at a couple of those, especially the shadowing and the volunteering and doing some type of internship, that's probably going to be their number one way that they're going to break into the fields that they want to break into. It's probably going to be the number one way that they're going to get their first job. And I know students that say they don't have time for internships, or internships don't pay. We've got to be able to talk through that process as well, so they understand the significance and importance of doing an internship. Even if they're not interested in that field, they're also gaining valuable skills. Plan for exploration. We have to have a plan. And what you should be doing is having your students do the following. Prepare an overview of campus majors. You know, as George talked about, on many campuses, there's hundreds of majors on college campuses. It gets kind of confusing. And not every major leads to a direct career. Majors are generally there in many aspects to build critical skills, critical thinking skills, critical communication skills. We've got to make sure that they understand that. If a student can't get into the business college, that's not the only way they can break into business. There's other majors out there that they can do so. Same thing when it comes to communication, same thing when it comes to journalism. So we want to make sure that they understand that. Develop a summary of basic requirements for each major. Some majors, you have to be able to be strong in math. You have to be able to pass macro and microeconomics to get into business programs. We want to make sure that they understand what those basic requirements are, not just during that first year, but down the road. That first year, when students look at those courses, they're thinking, oh yeah, I can do that. But then they look at those third year courses and those fourth year courses, and they look at they have to do a stats course into 300 level, and it scares the heck out of them. They've got to know what's coming up, not just what's in place for the semesters or the 2 semesters when they enter into your university. Identify possible career paths related to potential majors. Create a list of questions to ask. And the questions should come from you, but they also should come from the students. We should be able to do probing questions on our part to find out what the student really wants. Some students are really hesitant to ask those questions. And especially when you're talking about minority students, you're talking about students from a different different cultures have different help-seeking behaviors. Very oftentimes students think that you're the end all be all and you're going to tell them what to do, and they're not going to ask those type of questions. We've got to encourage them to be part of the process. We've got to encourage them that this is a relationship that we're building, and the relationship is based off of open communication. Share and reflect on information with you. Go to the campus career office and do a variety of different activities to find out what they might be interested in. As George mentioned, there are so many careers out there, and they have a limited view of the careers that are actually available to them. You know, a lot of us are in academic advising. I would assume that most of you, as you started your freshman year in college, didn't have the goal of becoming an academic advisor. It grew over time. It grew over time because of your experiences, because of your relationship to your advisor, because of you doing explorations with your career center. And lastly, interview professionals in the field and job shadow. Find out what it's really like. If your students want to go to law school, talk to a lawyer, find out what they really do. It's not all law and order. It's not all in the courtroom as students think it is. It's not all glamorous, in other words. Find out what the realities are of the occupations that they want to go into. What advisors can do. Establish personal career advising principles for advising. You should have a philosophy of advising. And it's kind of interesting. I taught at Colorado State for 23 years. Probably my 10th year there, a student came in and interviewed me and said, what's your philosophy of teaching? I had to stop the interview because I didn't even know I had a philosophy of teaching. It's not something that we really think about. And he had to come back a week later for me to think about, okay, this is my philosophy of teaching. Expand knowledge of understanding of career and student development theories. The student development theories are extremely important. And if you've got your master's degree in student affairs, you've got a PhD in student affairs, I know you've gone through student development theories. Make sure that you're applying those in your sessions. Make sure you're applying those with the students that you're actually working with. Know firsthand the career resources on campus and career-related handouts applicable to majors they advise. I would add something to that as well, because if you live in communities where students can actually do career exploration outside of the campus, they should also know what those resources are as well. Develop a career advising library for their offices. You should be able to make sure that students understand that there's a lot of material out there. There's a lot of material online that they could go to besides a career center so that they can understand what options are available to them. Become familiar with the resources, become familiar with the career navigator or Focus 2, and take part in the advising development programs that expand career advising expertise. We should have relationships with those that are in the career center. We're academic advisors, but we've got to build relationships not only with the students we serve, we also have to build relationships with the personnel and our colleagues across campus so that we're all on the same page, so we're giving the students the same messages.
Thank you, Blane. So what Blane was talking about were things that might be a little bit more applicable to the individual advising session. I'd like to take a step back and talk about Gordon's undecided curriculum. Virginia actually had a curriculum. And so when I mean this is that she had learning outcomes for 4 areas: self-assessment, educational knowledge, career and occupational knowledge, and decision-making. And she put this together with the learning outcomes with a pedagogy of critical thinking to a curriculum, which was a way of embracing all of this together and putting it together with some scope and sequence. Now, there's 2 handouts that we're going to be looking at that you have access to. One is a handout of how this curriculum has materials and resources related on the internet that you could use for each one of these components. And on the other hand, what it is a article that I had written about how Virginia organized her entire program at Ohio State. I would encourage you to read to get a better way of fulfilling this. Because those resources are there, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but just state that these 4 components of the curriculum were a way of organizing the learning outcomes, the activities, the resources, and also the assessments that we had of the students. So when we look at this, the notion of self-assessment, as you can see, we're looking at interests, abilities, values, and goal setting. And you can see what these different activities are, or different types of questions that are related to this. And the idea is that, again, what Blane had talked about and I had talked about, a lot of times students don't really know what their interests are, or their abilities, or their value. This is sometimes a developmental type of issue. They've never been really asked this during their first 12 years of schooling. And now all of a sudden you're sitting there and saying, well, what are you interested in? Goal setting. You may know this, but how do you end up by achieving some type of results with this? So these are all important. And so what the Virginia curriculum had were learning outcomes related to each one of these type of areas and activities and resources they could use. Educational knowledge, again, I'm reiterating a little bit what Blane had talked about, but the importance of knowing what's available, what type of curricular requirements are available, what type of courses that need to take, whether degrees or credentials are needed in a particular field or an area. And so this is a way of, again, helping students realize what is out there, what's available, and what is the dynamic involved that they may not have considered before. Likewise with career and occupational knowledge. These areas here of the nature of the work, places of employment, qualifications for advancement, these are things that a student may want to take into consideration, and all are knowable. And they can be reacting to them. And we can set this up so that if we're working with them in a flipped advising type of environment, we can actually have them react to the information and report back to us by using the evaluation tools within the learning management system or the e-portfolio. The last area is decision making. And what's important about this, it works in 2 ways. One is with Virginia was the idea of how you put this information together. We, as an advisor, programmatically can help students integrate all this information. And one of the sheets that we have for you is what Virginia collected, or what expected of students to collect by using her curriculum. And it's 4 pages long of things. Students had to report what their interests were, their abilities. They had to show reflection on these type of topics. It's pretty staggering. But when you look at it, if you had this information as an advisor, how much would that help you advise a student? And so how do you set this up so you can get that type of information? And the other area of decision-making is helping students become aware of their own decision-making styles and what are the advantages of it and what some of the challenges they might face by not modifying their styles so they can embrace more in terms of what is available. So these are some of the areas, and a nice way of taking a look at this by the e-tutorials. We have several here at NACADA as a resource. There's one specifically Undecided. There's one on flipped advising. There's one on how to develop a professional development program. And so these all 3 can actually interrelate. And if you take a look at this YouTube video, I show you some of the elements of the course and these e-tutorials and how they're applicable for working with undecided students and using that technology. I do want to really address and emphasize the importance of doing flipped, because one, Gordon's curriculum can be so easily put into modules that you could use where you can integrate the resources, the learning outcomes, the evaluation of students, and getting the feedback both collectively and individually from them. Also, multiple advisors can be formed, can be assigned to a course or the section that you're using with flipped advising. So you can have the career advisor working with the academic advisor, looking at what the students are doing. We can integrate this rather than keeping them off there on separate types of technologies that only the career office has or only advising office has. We can put this together as the students begin to work on this. Modules can be created for special populations of subtypes of students. So, if you want to work with athletic students, or else if you have students who really need more of a focus on decision making, we can help them by putting in extra materials. And finally, student evaluation results can be aggregated overall. The key here is that if all the students are going through this program, you have program goals, you have their evaluation of how they've proceeded through their activities and the evaluation process. You aggregate that, you can begin to get an idea of how effective your advising program is, which is critical. It's data driven at that point. And you can go through that assessment circle where are areas you need to improve, where areas you're doing well, and make those type of judgments much more easily because now you have the data. So again, all these different methods and approaches can be used with a flipped advising approach, because the flipped advising approach is both synchronous and asynchronous. As long as the content is in that learning management system or the e-portfolio, you could still do one-on-one. You could do it over a video conference call. You could do it by just answering emails within the system. You could do it by a discussion board. It gives you much more flexibility overall in working with your students. So what we want to do here with this activity 2 is have you work with case studies. And so what Blane and I will be doing is be showing you 3 different case studies and how you would approach working with these students. And how do you evaluate students' critical thinking as they engage in and creating their academic and career plans, if we're going to be asking you. And how does your institution support what you are working with these type of undecided students? And what steps should they take to improve that support? So what we're going to be doing is, at this point, we're going to be having you take a look at that worksheet again. These questions are on there. And then what Blane and I will be doing is popping up these different case studies, and depending upon the nature of the group, we'll assign maybe some of you to different groups to deal with individual ones, but we'll work with that as we go through. But the idea is that we want you to respond to these case studies.